Hello, welcome back to Framework. I am Al Schwartz. Joining me as usual is John Bernard.
Hey, it's me.
John, it's been a couple weeks now. I'm still kind of puzzling over the finale of House of the Dragon. And so I wanted you to kind of dredge us back up with me for a bit. Because there's, I think, more and perhaps more deeply concerning issues with that than I think we got into the first time.
Okay, so to reset, I mostly thought when it happened, I was just like, I'm very underwhelmed by this. And that's that. It did not build to a thing I thought it was building to or any sort of conclusion of any particular note. It kind of climaxed with this big Alicent Rhaenyra conversation.
Yeah, and then a montage of a bunch of stuff about to happen.
Right.
Which we kind of did that a little bit in the first episode, just sort of the weird way that things stop very suddenly and yet they don't lead to a cliffhanger. And maybe we'll touch on that again a bit later. But the thing that, there's two things that have been sitting wrong with me, and they have to do with character sympathies and with budgets. And I think we'll start with the character sympathy stuff, which we got into last time. The big lift the finale set for itself in this case was that Alicent would offer up her sons, really plural, to be executed in order to end the war if it meant that she and her daughter could, walk the earth like Cain from Kung Fu, which was a just big lift of a character shift that didn't feel like the show really pulled off.
It would seem to be sort of a betrayal of most of the defining characteristics of Alicent up to this point. And depending on how you read it, extraordinarily selfish.
Which would be okay, I think.
Right.
If the show presented it that way. But it seemed intent on trying to present it as actually a moment of empowerment or enlightenment for Alicent, where because she went on her little walkabout and floated in a pond, she realized that her petty ambitions had caused too much suffering, and she was overcoming that by trying to end the war. Again, by letting her sons be killed, which is that's a sticking point that did not sell very well, and trying to make that into something that made her more sympathetic rather than less, I think really fucks up the whole sympathy matrix.
Yeah, I suppose if this had been coded as a negative thing, as a bad act by Alicent, I think that it might have actually been very interesting. Although, not that the Greens need like more bad guys on their side. That's sort of the problem there. Like Alicent's sort of the only character thus far that we've kind of been, actually intended to root for on that side of the conflict. The great Otto Hightower notwithstanding, she's kind of like the only one that you were really supposed to like, I think, in the show, which, is it. I mean, I'd say it's a problem, but the Greens are the most interesting part for sure. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to like her brother, but he's also one of my favorites. But I think the show almost wants him to be sort of a fuckboy or something, like kind of an idiot. But
I'm not sure about that either. Like, I think they want me to think like Kristen Cole maybe a little. I certainly don't. I'm not sure.
No, but he got more interesting as he got worse.
He did, yeah.
Which is, a thing that can happen in the Game of Thrones universe. That I mean, really, I guess it's as simple as character arcs. When bad people are getting better, a la Jaime Lannister or the Hound. That's interesting.
Tyrion, even, yeah. Well, he kind of got too good and then got less interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and they kind of couldn't figure out what to do with them without just regressing. And when good people are going bad, obviously, that's a whole genre of prestige television show unto itself that can be pretty entertaining. The weird thing, I guess, they could have presented this as something evil she was doing, but I think really it's just it needed to be something she was doing because she was completely broken by the war. and
It's
that
better
she
writing.
realized the best thing she could do was salvage like her daughter and maybe the other unseen son, Sir not appearing in this season.
Jeez.
They could have included him in that, but I think to do that, I mean, the way I think I would have tried to structure that was just having a scene with her and her daughter trying to go over like what are their options and saying like, look, Aemond is going to keep fighting until they kill him, and that there's no getting around that. He's a lost cause basically, and then having Alicent maybe trying to figure out a way to save Aegon and have them come to the conclusion that, well, Rhaenyra can't possibly let him live because her enemies will be able to rally around him, even if he's just a burnt up Muppet prop that they can hold up.
The obvious logic of the situation that has been established all year.
Yeah, yes. Well established. And then if you throw on top of that, like, but even like he's done for because even if we somehow beat Rhaenyra, Aemond won't let him live anymore.
Yeah. So
he's screwed either way. And that is a bridge to the conclusion they want the character to be getting to, I think. And that would be one way of doing it. But regardless, we are where we are. The thing that struck me after we recorded last is that the way this connects back to another recent HBO show that we talked about the premiere of, but never did an episode on the finale of, which is True Detective Night Country. And that was a weird ass finale too. And I think exhibited a lot of the same problems that we've been talking about here. Because if you recall, that season kicks off with this incredible nightmarish tableau of a murder where they find 7 nude men mysteriously marched off into the Arctic ice and frozen together into this just horrible shunting of an image.
Yep.
And then we introduce our detective characters that are not very interested in that scene at all. It's got to be the biggest, most interesting thing that's ever happened to their tiny town, but not according to them.
Yeah, it just sort of reminds them of a cold case. This corpse frost blob is that's interesting and all, but it's also a bit of a nuisance, and it's really getting in the way of me exploring this cold case. That's sort of the vibe of the entire show, start to finish, really, and certainly by the end.
Well, by the end, it sort of clarifies. When you get to the reveal of what happened to them, we understand now, not on a plot level, not on a character level, but on a show running level. Okay, they didn't want us to invest in this crime too much because they were always planning to reveal that the victims kind of had it coming. I don't think they sold like the horror of that death is so brutal. I don't know that their actual crime befits that. They also
it's also ridiculous. Yeah. It's, if you recall,
their motivation for their original crime was also like this incredible sci-fi MacGuffin that is a weird fit for this show's universe, and also does seem to really justify the crime to a great degree. I think like it's a much better motivation than real world polluters have, including the community is supposed to be their big crime on top of manslaughter. But then like they also killed this woman, the cold case woman, and that I think is,
and they were all struck by a madness to attack her as a group. Is the other
well, because
she's
destroying she's destroying the cure for cancer. And not just cancer, but also aging generally, and maybe death. Like
even still,
it's worth being upset about. I'm just saying.
Yes, but 12 math nerds are not going to, as a group, rise and murder somebody. They did not sell me on that.
Yeah, I think I could be sold on that sort of a group madness, and like once somebody, I don't know, it's almost a Julius Caesar thing. Where like once this first stabbing is done, then the other people are like, oh shit.
It's that they had to pass the knife around so the culpability was evenly shared between the entire murdered group. So.
Yes, it's a fine line between the murder of Julius Caesar and that scene in Airplane where everybody lines up to slap the hysterical woman.
Right.
But anyway, like in both of these cases, it feels like there is this issue of the showrunners kind of wanting to do a certain thing thematically and wanting to do a certain characterization with some of their primary characters, but the plot that they have established gets in the way of that because it's too big and violent, dramatic. The stuff that's happened is too big and violent, dramatic to do this more internal stuff later on, and they both like kind of like House of Dragon, especially just ignores some stuff that's happened, kind of acts like they haven't passed several points of no return in this relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent. Like their children and grandchildren have been murdered by the other side, and they're far too cordial with each other after that.
You could argue that after the events of the first season finale, we've already reached that point. Like,
yes.
That's sort of the promise of the end of season 1. It's just like, oh, okay, no more fucking around. There's no more room to negotiate here. We're killing kids. It's time for this to escalate. And that's sort of the exact same place we land at the end of season 2 as well.
Yeah, I would say that's what season 1 was arguing. And then the premiere of season 2 includes an even worse child murder.
Yeah.
Going the other way. And then we're just sort of like, but it's inconvenient for, I guess, where we want this relationship to be. But I just don't think you need to rewrite the entire series of events to have this ongoing, like, sort of diplomacy between them. I mean, it's presented as more interpersonal. Like, they're more concerned about their own relationship with their old best friend than with the child that best friend is responsible for murdering. And that nothing could be less sympathetic than that, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, here's the I feel like this is a show where they have just correctly determined there's not a lot of likable characters in the events of this story. There probably was some room, I think we've discussed, about making some of them a little bit more likable. Maybe, Laris, was a good example of that, or many other people, really. But I think ultimately you're dealing with a bunch of assholes, and that's sort of the promise and premise of the show. Like that's the fun of it. We're here to see people, like scheme and stab and betray each other for the throne. That was the fun of Game of Thrones. And the plot as laid out here, it's all psychopathic Targaryens. The promise is there's going to be a lot of skullduggery and backstabbing. That's the fun of it. And they kind of been like, well, I think you should have to like Rhaenyra and Alicent, and because they're the two sort of lead figures of each faction. I think that means that we shouldn't like them, maybe, maybe, well, or not that we shouldn't like them, but they should be, they shouldn't be doing this shit, essentially.
Nobody should be doing this shit. This is it's just not believable that humans would act this way. And I do think that there's a cart before the horse thing here, where having characters be the road to making characters likable is making them understandable first and foremost. And it's not by making them virtuous. And these guys, I mean, Alicent and Rhaenyra can really only be called like virtuous within the milieu of Game of Thrones. Like, not on another show, they would not be really nice, lovable characters. But
well, this is the problem. Like the things that they do aren't very nice most of the time, and they kind of have to like bend themselves into pretzels to make these acts like sympathetic, I guess, is the idea. And what it actually does is kind of remove their agency from it.
Well, that's one issue. Yeah, is that you one criticism you can level is that too much of like the atrocities of this war that are being committed in their names are done sort of around them and in spite of them and against their wishes. And arguably there are stronger characters if they're actually just doing the things themselves.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be every single one of those. If Daemon acted on his own for the killing of the kid in the beginning of the season, that's a narrative point I can understand, but
Daemon and Aemond are wild card characters by their nature.
Right.
And could be responsible for that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that Alicent should have condoned him burning down the city that he does in the finale just because he's feeling mad that Rhaenyra got a leg up on him. But beyond that, it's just, I think this is I guess a higher elevation structural thing, is not just trying to make them more sympathetic because they didn't sign off on the bad stuff, but having them ignore the bad stuff. That's I think the thing that's more alienating is how forgiving they seem to be of each other and understanding of each other's non-culpability. Because I don't know, you and I are pretty new parents, but think I'd be pretty goddamn pissed at somebody if they cut the head off my child.
Yeah. That's you kind of have to be like, well, it's a Game of Thrones world. There's a very high infant mortality rate. They're used to this sort of it doesn't hold water, no matter how many excuses you make for it. That's sort of a problem we're not getting past, I think.
But the more excuses you make for that, the less believable it becomes that for Alicent or anybody to have these high-minded, I just want to be free and be me and not to be beholden to this Game of Thrones shit. I don't necessarily buy that anybody was thinking about things in that way in that time. It seems like a sop to modern audience sensibilities, which
it's fantasy, so whatever.
You think it would be? Yeah. There's some of that. They have Game of Thrones. The Westeros seems to be more advanced in its relationship to slavery than like the medieval European time period it was drawing from, perhaps. But
well, that would be, an example of them changing it to, suit modern audiences because it's fantasy, that.
Yes.
So, and no one's like, there should be more slavery in this. That's not a complaint you hear. But
the more you leaned into what you were just saying about the excuse of it's a brutal medieval world where infant mortality is so high that you just have to get over that sometimes.
It's not great. I know.
The more you rely on that to justify the stuff, the less the high-mindedness of it makes any sense. So it's undercutting itself. And the other thing I just think more generally, fantasy, whatever thing, you should never be trying to get where you're going thematically or character-wise by trying to get people to forget about plot events that have already happened.
That does seem like they have to do that a little to do what they're doing. Is just like, well, you got to forget about some of that shit at this point. So much has happened. How can you remember it all? Seems to be what they're saying. And that's not a great place for a show to be either.
Yeah. And True Detective, or like Night Country, had that issue too. You can't be saying, well, don't worry about that stuff that we did earlier. It's like, no, like if you're asking me not to worry about the stuff you showed me earlier, I can't also care about the stuff you're showing me now. You've told me not to do that.
I think the biggest problem with Night Country was they straight up just like invented one of the most grotesque mass murders I've seen on television, reminiscent of John Carpenter's The Thing, as your set piece murder. And no one seems interested in solving that or it going down. They made it too exciting. They made
it was too good.
Yeah, it was just too overwhelmingly gross and memorable to tell the story they actually wanted to tell. I don't know exactly how you fix that, but probably don't have a giant corpse blob at the center of your story. If that's not really relevant.
Or you find a way to make the corpse blob relevant, which doesn't seem like that hard to do.
That's probably the better version because that's certainly the most memorable thing about that show.
Yes, even now.
Yeah.
Well, but it was that was this slow building feeling across the whole season and nobody's freaked out by it. Like everybody thinks it's a big inconvenience, and it should be the biggest story in the world. Like there's this classic stuff of sort of like Jodie Foster's detective character or sheriff, like, no, I don't want outside help, like intruding on my police work here, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, there wouldn't be any choice in that. The FBI would be all over this shit. Like there would be documentary crews flooding that town. There would be like a Netflix documentary, an Amazon one, and an Apple one, like all there the second day. It's
rural Alaska. I can buy some leeway in that regard if it serves the story they're telling. Honestly, at first I thought it was some sort of like cursed town, like Derry, Maine kind of shit going on. Honestly, it was like, there's just so many more murders up here than you would ever expect. It has something to do with the character of the town, you might say. I thought that's where this was headed, and it's like, nope, it's not it at all. It's a different weird supernatural thing they're implying, but it's not that. It's just that no one cares about this crime. And
you know what would have helped that a lot, actually, making it a period piece. If it had been the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, anything before
that's true.
The internet, before true crime was its own thing, then I wouldn't be going like, how is nobody
like anything can happen at the end of the world kind of thing? Yeah, like there's just no one to tell the story in the 1980s,
right? Or it takes them longer to get there. But in the world where the internet exists, which they had to use because most of the detective work on that thing was done by just somebody Googling stuff off screen and being like, "Hey, have you guys seen True Detective season 1? Like, I found this connection." But they didn't need to do that. It's just so I don't know if 2 examples is enough to make up a trend at HBO, but it is worrying me. HBO for my whole adult life has been one of the most reliable, I guess, institutions in public life. In terms of like producing the type of shows that I want to watch and obsess over on a weekly basis every Sunday.
Oh, that's flimsy now. I mean, under new management in a big way. With it, it's no longer HBO that we're even talking about. It's Max. It's a whole different thing. So yeah, that's about as fragile as it's ever been as adults for me. I mean, yeah, they're not making the Deadwood and the Sopranos anymore for sure.
So. No, I mean, even though they did make more Deadwood and like they did the revival movies for both of those.
Yeah.
And to not the greatest effect. I think we did a Many Saints of Newark episode.
Oh yeah, that's what inspired the entire Sopranos rewatch. Actually,
that's true.
and yeah, that's actually quite bad, that one. But I don't know. I have nice things to say about the Deadwood finale, but another day perhaps on that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that concerns me here, getting over to like the budgetary stuff, is this also took a while to like settle in for me and realize. But I do think that House of the Dragon, particularly in season 2, that the narrative was harmed by budget constraints in a way that I don't think Game of Thrones kind of ever has. The budget constraints you could feel in season 1 a little more tangibly of the original Game of Thrones, I think.
Yeah, they didn't know how to make that kind of show. It was very notable early on. They made it anyway. They did really good character writing and relationships and stuff.
They did, and the scope was still there. And I think the trade-off you could feel in the early seasons of Game of Thrones was we are maybe going to sacrifice some effects, some spectacle. We're going to do some Shakespearean off-stage battles stuff and just kind of cut in after the aftermath to tell us what happened. And instead, they put those resources into sets. And I think that's flipped around with House of the Dragon now. And the choice has been, we are going to cut corners on sets and locations in order to do up the dragon stuff and CGI as well and as big and fancy as possible. And I think that is a very big mistake now in hindsight.
I mean, I would say that the one thing that I can really give this show at this point is that the dragon sequences are good and they work. And that would have been a question mark and does seem to be, to some extent, what the show is based around. All the highlights of season 2 are dragon related for me. So
yeah,
I understand the logic maybe here. All the big memeable moments are going to be dragon stuff. And the story demands that to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, and beyond that logic, I mean, I guess taking it a little further is if you fuck up a dragon image, that is going to be instantly memeable.
Yeah.
In a way that what I'm talking about, it just having too many scenes inside Dragonstone, that is not as easily graspable, as easily memeable, mockable, whatever. And it does feel like you can get around this for a while because it even took me through the whole season to figure out what exactly was bothering me about it. Because the movie or the show still does look really expensive, scene to scene. Like
right.
That.
But I mean, they shot like several hours worth of Harrenhal material. And It seems like, well, we built the set. We're going to shoot Harrenhal. And it's going to be a major place that we spend most of the time here this season. Not too much happens in Harrenhal, really. You could have done 2 episodes in Harrenhal and done plenty, I think.
And we could have gone back to River Run with the Tully Boy to get something there. We could have spread it out. Damon could have been going to different places around there to visit people instead of always having them come to him and meeting him in the same, either under the tree in the yard or in the dining room. And that is, it's not immediately ruinous, but I think it's also a factor. It contributes to the feeling we were talking about last time. That about not understanding the narrative priorities of the show and like the stuff that it jumps over very quickly versus the stuff it really settles in and spends too much time on. It's like, I think this is the reason why we ended up getting 4 or 5 scenes of Corliss talking to his bastard son on the same dock set and having more or less the same conversation interaction with him.
Those all feel like they were shot the same series of days too. You know, it's like we're getting all our dock scenes. Day. You know, yeah, maybe. And I never know quite how this works with television with different directors for episodes, but when they clearly shot everything at once, you know, in one location. I mean, it's especially something like this, which is essentially an 8-hour film. You know, something that is like planned this explicitly in advance, beat to beat. I imagine. I mean, well, it has to be for the CGI, right? I think the writing actually was the problem here, to be honest. I think you can do what they did with the sets, and it can work. I think season 1 of Game of Thrones does a pretty good job of it. But, you know, they just ran out of shit for these guys to do at Dragonstone. So you have endless scenes of Rhaenyra being like, I'm so bored of being at Dragonstone. I wish I could leave Dragonstone. And it's just like, yes, I agree. You're right. You should leave Dragonstone.
But I don't know. Like, even the first season of Game of Thrones, to me, never felt like there was anywhere where the story wanted to go that it was avoiding. And
that's true. I mean, but the Red Keep is so interesting a location, and we're we're just learning it and seeing, like, you know, you can do a lot of scenes there, and it's not going to feel dull because, well, there's interesting shit to happen there. You know, all the scenes with Littlefinger and Cersei and Robert, these are all good scenes. Doesn't matter that they're in the same location.
Yeah. Well, and Winterfell is a pretty interesting location.
Yes, all of it. Well, learning the world is very fun. You know, obviously that's one of the main appeals of Game of Thrones.
But when it's time to go to the Wall, we'll go to the Wall and see the Wall. When it's time to go for Tyrion to go be locked up in the Vale for a while, we'll go there and we'll have exterior scenes of them hiking through the hills and all that. And, you know, if half of the scenes of that season on like the Daenerys side had involved her like staying in the same tent where her brother gets the crown, for example, that's what this would feel like.
That's a good point. Yeah.
They were willing to take her outside so much.
Yeah, you never feel like you're repeating scenes with those guys. With oh my god, I forgot the name of the barbarians. The
Dothraki.
The Dothraki. Oh my god! Wow. I've never forgotten the Dothraki before.
Yeah. Time's march is cruel.
Yeah. So that you're right. It does feel every scene with them is in a different place. You know, even if it's just a different outside area, it does feel like they're moving around and doing shit. Well, this is just, I think, well-made stuff, I think. I mean, you have a great Dragonstone set. Let's shoot the Dragonstone set. I get that. But, it was more active. Even as a famously low-budget season as season 1 was.
Yeah. And season 2 of that show, you know, the budget's going up, but you can still tell a big difference in the polish and the money in the big climactic battle of Blackwater at the end of the second season versus the battle at the Wall in season 4 or any of the later
they start just having an open checkbook, essentially. 3 and 4 around then. Yeah. 2 still.
But even with that, season 2, it's like, well, now we're going to be going through the Riverlands. Now we're going to go to see Dragonstone, which we hadn't seen in the first season. Now we're going to go beyond the Wall. And it felt like, and we're going to see the Iron Islands. And it's never hesitating to show us new locations because their budget for sets is very large. And maybe it helps that the dragons were still small enough at that point. And they sidelined the wolves to a degree. People people especially have complained about that. I think that's a trade-off that was definitely worth having. And House of the Dragon now has gotten backwards, and it contributes to this feeling of running in place. Even as we're moving past some stuff too quickly, we're also just one of the big assets here is this big expansive world. And we seem confined to too few rooms within that world.
That's true. That's true. I mean, the philosophical approach is, I guess, being more dragons. I don't know if that's a philosophical approach, but the decision they made is we're going to amp up the dragons. You would agree that those are the best scenes, right? Like those are the most exciting moments. And, well, I mean, obviously the most exciting moments, but I don't know. Would you say that they are net negative, perhaps? If this is where all the money goes? Yeah.
Because I think you're totally right that it is part of the promise of this premise is that we're going back to the time when dragons were running wild. And so
fighting everyone.
Yeah, dragons being front in the middle of the screen a lot more does come with this territory. You need to do that. I just think another big part of the appeal and the promise of Game of Thrones is this is the show where they spare no expense. And if you start cutting corners, then you are undermining the central appeal of the show more than you might think initially, and more than the audience might realize initially. But I think it's having an effect, a deleterious effect over time.
That is the Zaslav reputation for HBO is the watching the purse strings a lot more closely, which is I mean, if this wasn't Game of Thrones, they probably would have canceled this by now as an expensive show. But it's one of their big IPs, so they're going to keep making these. If they're doing it on the cheap, that could be problems. That could definitely sort of befoul the franchise in a way the volume kind of has for Star Wars television shows, maybe.
Yeah, that's how it feels to me. And I mean, maybe the original Game of Thrones got lucky with some of this stuff because it existed before the volume, and so just shooting outside it was just before the time where shooting outside was a cheaper option than doing incredible CGI stuff with dragons. And now it's flipped around, and the CGI is cheaper than taking everybody outside.
But still not cheap. It's still gonna hamstring your budget, probably.
Yeah. But that's what you can't. I just don't think you can do Game of Thrones and be sparing expenses. That is now it's too ingrained.
I think they're going to try, man. I think that's going to be that's going to be the move. We got another show coming next year. I wonder how that'll look. Yeah.
You could do a True Detective on the cheap.
That's true.
But
I don't know. Do you think you want to see more True Detective at this point?
No, I didn't want more before this one.
Right.
But I thought switching up Nick Pizzolatto, who's I came to decide was just somebody whose sensibilities I didn't like that much.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I thought that would help. And the premiere had that incredible hook. We were pretty jazzed about that premiere.
Oh, what's this corpse frozen pile going to be? Oh, yeah, right.
And there's even something too, maybe about, I don't want to make very much of it because I'm not quite sure how it holds up, but it's both that, but with Pizzolatto and Martin, and now Night Country and House of the Dragon, you've got new people taking over for these sort of singular creators, and maybe wanting to do something different with it, and maybe not being as comfortable or as into the hyper violent aspects of it, or the really extreme gore stuff that came with it.
Well, the sex is totally gone from House of the Dragon.
Yeah,
it's just not there anymore. That was
no. It's just I mean, you still get once or twice a season. We go walk through a brothel and we'll see a woman full on filleting an erect penis.
Oh God, that's right. I forgot all about that. How about that?
Yeah, I know. It doesn't feel as central anymore because now it's just window dressing instead of the it used to be about sex position. There's they got to do a scene explaining this stuff to us, so they're gonna have naked prostitutes doing sex stuff while they do it. And now they don't even include the exposition. It's even more gratuitous in a weird way, even as the show feels more chaste, or more.
I mean, maybe
British.
It's interesting. I guess it's Game of Thrones. Maybe the difference is just you saw everyone naked on Game of Thrones, essentially. For not everyone, but a lot of your central cast. You never see any of the name actors naked on House of the Dragon. It is entirely extras.
You saw Aemond.
I guess so. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
I mean, I think just it's not leaving as much of an impression, even when it's doing different stuff.
Sorry, Aemond.
Because oh yeah, that. Whatever. Alfie Allen cast a large shadow, but
indeed he did. Yeah.
But no, it's just strange what it's doing. A lot of things to lesser effect, I guess, and that includes sex stuff.
I don't think it needs sex stuff. It's just the identity of the show changing. And again, this is not Game of Thrones, even, except it kind of is. It kind of is just sort of like Game of Thrones. You remember, right? It's like that. So,
it's totally Game of Thrones. They kept the theme song.
Of course they did.
You don't get to do that and then sort of pull out the card of, well, we're doing something totally different. It's no, not really.
Right.
And also, yeah, I mean, also it would be fine if what you were doing different was working better. But the stuff that's working the best is the stuff that is just like before.
So is this a ruinous season, do you think? Or is this a very writable ship?
I think it's pretty writable, but you really need to free up the checkbook for next season because now you have to make up for all the spectacle you pushed off. And the other thing I think would behoove them is just to be honest about how, like, yeah, also we were kind of fucked up by the writer's strike.
Right.
Like, another reason why you might have 4 or 5 scenes of the Valerians having the same interaction in the same place across the whole season
Right.
is because for a lot of shooting that season, you weren't allowed to have writers on set doing any rewriting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you had a lot of first draft stuff going out and not knowing. That probably goes into, again, I'm not an expert on TV show production, but being able to block out what sets you need and what exteriors you need to get. And your shooting schedule was like, well, we got to get as much as we can with the what limited scripts we have that we can't touch up. So let's get as much as we can out of the Dragonstone set while we're here. Let's get as much as we can out of the docks, out of wherever else, the Harrenhal set. And I think that there could be a little damage control saying, look, we had to cut this season a little short. We didn't get to do as much polish on it because the writer's strike messed us up. But going forward, they'll be fine. And if they're cutting corners here, trying to make the season cheaper, they just robbed Peter to pay Paul because now they need to do all the spectacle in the next season, which is going to make it even more expensive.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious a little bit how they view this. Is this because I don't get the sense this is a flagship show, even though I do think it's probably the most popular thing they have, right?
It has to be. What else would be?
Right. Yeah. So it's a little odd that they treat it this way. This seems like their number one thing, but I don't know. The new regime seems to be not great at this stuff. So yeah. Is there room for this to improve though with that in place, or is this just I mean, it really seems like they're kind of circling the drain in a lot of regards. Do you have hope for this to improve? Because I'll be honest, I don't know that I do.
It's hard to say. I mean, look, is there room to improve? Absolutely, but that would require changes.
Yeah,
that you're just getting that you don't. This is, I guess, why I wanted to drag you back here. I don't know that I have the confidence I used to in HBO being able to write a ship like this because they are no longer that. They're Max, and I guess it is true what I was saying about the identity of Game of Thrones as an IP. It's also true of HBO more as a brand. It used to be the place you went for more adult, a little more difficult fare, but also part of the appeal was they spared no expense.
Yeah.
And if you start sparing expenses, then it becomes very difficult to justify the premium subscription price and the time investment. And going back to this, like
no, I'm going to be a Max member forever just because it gives me access to The Wire and, The Sopranos and all this other shit. Rome.
Yeah, they got their hooks in us.
Yeah. But it would be nice if they were producing stuff at that level. I mean, even Rome. Just give me something as good as Rome and I'll be very happy, and that's...
I thought about Rome a lot, actually, in relation to House of the Dragon now, because that one is when especially the second season of that got canceled sort of to production, and they had to sprint through a lot of history and events, which include a lot of off-screen battling in the last few episodes of that series. They managed to do it in a still pretty satisfying way, actually.
I think we really appreciate Rome now. Looking back on that, it's really needed to be at least 3 seasons, but for what it was, it's a very, very strong show relative to what they're doing now. I'm kind of just like, it seems like a lost art almost.
Yeah. Well, and it's also the exact approach that I had hoped they would take with House of the Dragon structurally, in that the conceit there is telling, the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire, like this very famous, tumultuous time in history, through the point of view characters of these couple of foot soldiers. That
would have been so cool.
We're very tightly woven through all these big events and big battles, but kind of fell through the cracks of history. So that they're interacting with Mark Antony and Octavian and Julius Caesar, but it's people that we didn't learn about in history class. And the way Fire and Blood, the book, is set up, it's so perfect for having that.
That would have been great. Yeah.
That should have, and that could have been, Laris and Massaria.
Yeah, that exact conceit would have been great for this show, actually. And, or some version of it. Yeah, totally. Damn. That's it. I mean, there's an element of that in Game of Thrones, too. For certain, and even some of the power brokers, guys like Varys exist in because of that. And they're some of the best characters on the show. Yeah, damn. Oh, well, that should have happened.
Definitely. I kept thinking, they should have watched Rome a lot more before when they were outlining this series.
Yeah. I just stumbled into the Rome comparison, but that's right on. Yeah.
The only other thing that I wanted to mention, this is sort of like circling back to audience sympathies and whatever, and as a comparison point to for the original series Game of Thrones. My favorite part of the original series was probably like seasons 2 and 3, when the War of the Five Kings is in full swing, and as that name promises, there are 5 distinct factions all fighting at the same time there. And we have inns with all of those factions with, again, sympathy is a moving target when it comes to Game of Thrones, but we know people well, and we are not actively rooting against at least somebody in each camp of Stannis' camp, of the Stark camp, of the Lannister camp, of even the Greyjoy camp. We're kind of sympathetic to Theon. And so season 2 of House of the Dragon ends with, I believe, 6 distinct armies on the march. And the problem is there are multiple of those armies where we just don't know anybody in them. We don't have any in with that group. So you've got the fleets are kind of heading towards each other. You got the Valyrians on one side. Okay, we know them. The other side coming, you got the Lannister guy and his new
pirate buddies.
Admiral, pirate buddies. So we spent a little bit of time with them, not very much. It's pretty unbalanced there how much more time we spent with the Valyrians than them.
Yeah, but we haven't seen the Valyrians do shit either.
That's true. That's true. So that's kind of an issue too. We don't love them the way we love the Starks. And then we have Kristen Cole and Allison's brother marching. And so that's okay. That's enough of an in with that army. And Daemon is leading a different army sort of either towards them or around them to try and go straight to the capital. Perhaps it's not totally clear what's happening there, but that is enough that if those armies clash, that would feel like a Game of Thrones battle where we're like not, I mean, the old school ones. I guess it's like the Battle of the Bastards, where we're like, yes, definitely, all the bad guys are on this side, all the good guys are on this side. But
I can't imagine seeing an episode that is a crucible for one of these characters in the way that like Blackwater is for Tyrion, or the Watcher of the Wall is for Jon Snow. Like,
sure.
Like that seems to be where they need to go. And I guess maybe Daemon could do something like that, but I generally find Daemon uninteresting. They put in the time with him, though.
Sure. And then down south, you've got the Hightowers finally marching out from their side of the country towards the capital. And there's a dragon being ridden by one of Alicent's sons, but we haven't met them at all. We don't know a single. We know the name of one person in that group, but we haven't seen a face for them. And we don't have a name to put to a face there. And then we have all these Northmen coming down, and we haven't met a single one of them either. And this just feels like very basic, audience sympathy through perspective stuff. We should have a rooting interest in these armies before they're fighting, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, who do we like? The young River Run kid, whose name I've already forgotten. I like him.
Yeah,
interesting.
And Allison's brother.
Yeah,
that's the only people.
Sure.
And I kind of like Daemon, I suppose. I mean,
bogged
down a bad subplot, but that happens to good characters on genre shows from time to time.
Sure, but like I don't know, they're very clearly going for Jaime Lannister vibes, and it's not taken for me. I'll tell you what. There is let's see. this is my struggle. I'm kind of interested in what's going on at the Red Keep always. The sort of the nastier characters always congregate there, and that's where the mean green characters are, and I like them a little bit. Not that I'm like rooting for them or anything per se, but it's not bad to spend time there. Dragonstone is not working for me. I would be hard pressed to tell you my favorite character on this show. And not because I have like a lot of people jockeying for that position as I would in Game of Thrones, because I'm just kind of like, I don't really know who I care about at this point.
Yeah. Well,
this is a bigger general issue with it, I guess.
Yeah, no, this is why this big structural stuff that Game of Thrones did so well, and probably never got quite enough credit for. And now, after the way that show ended, really does not get the credit I think it's rich for. This stuff's harder than it looks, as House of the Dragon demonstrates.
Right, and I mean, I don't know. I'm not done with this show by any means. I would say season 2 is a step down from season 1. It did have a cool dragon fight in the center, a really good one. It promises to have more. I want to see how everyone dies a little bit, But I don't know. It doesn't really have the thing.
Well, we're not getting to spoiler territory, but
right.
If you just want to see a bunch of these people die, season 3 has room to improve.
Good. Let's bring that along then. But like you said, it's not going to matter that much because I don't really care about any of them, and I don't know. That seems like a problem.
A shame.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a shame, and I also don't want to sound just uber capitalist about it, but pouring money into it is probably the biggest cure-all solution. Because we need to get out and meet new people, see new things, and see new places. That's my big prescription.
Well, I mean, they're taking stabs at that. The Lannister, whose name I've already forgotten, meeting the pirates. That was a step towards that. It's the idea, basically, and it was kind of just it felt a little out of nowhere, showing up at the end as it did. So, again, I think it is harder than it looks to make this happen.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
It's also harder than it looks to end a podcast.
Indeed it is. Thank you for joining us to talk about this and just sort of sort through our ideas. Look at me trying to end this in a concise way. It could just be over. It could just be over.
Yeah, just put it.